Ambassador Park Ji-hai stepped through the massive doors of the Galactic Council chambers. Her black diplomatic uniform, a stark contrast against the rainbow of alien colors that filled the enormous hall. The chamber itself was a marvel of engineering, carved from a single piece of living crystal that pulsed with soft blue light. Floating platforms held representatives from dozens of species, each one more bizarre than the last. Her security detail, consisting of Captain Bei, Sung-min, and Sergeant Han Yuri, flanked her as they walked down the long corridor toward the central speaking platform. The aliens watched their approach with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely disguised contempt. Humans were the newest species to achieve faster-than-light travel, and in galactic terms, they were considered primitive children playing. With dangerous toys, the Vortons dominated the left side of the chamber, their purple skin gleaming under the crystal lights. They were traders and merchants, controlling most of the galaxy's commercial networks. Their representative, Chancellor Mordok, tapped his elongated fingers against his floating chair as he watched the human delegation approach. On the right side, the insectoid Kethals clustered together in their characteristic hive formation. Their chitinous exoskeletons clicked and scraped as they communicated through rapid chemical signals. Ambassador Zik, their speaker, regarded the humans with compound eyes that reflected the chamber's light like tiny mirrors. But it was the Nexari who commanded the most attention. These blue-scaled giants stood nearly 8 feet tall, their powerful frames built for war. High Commander Veltar sat on his throne-like chair, his scarred face telling the story of countless battles. His species had earned their reputation through conquest. Absorbing weaker civilizations into their growing empire, Ji-hai reached the central platform and activated the translation matrix. Her words would be heard in over 50 different languages. Simultaneously, she took a deep breath, knowing that this moment would define humanity's future in the galaxy. "Honored representatives," she began, her voice carrying across the vast chamber. "I stand before you today not as a conqueror or a supplicant, but as a neighbor. Earth has watched the stars for millennia, dreaming of the day we would join the galactic community." A ripple of what might have been laughter passed through the Kethal section. Their chemical signals created a sweet, cloying scent that made Captain Bei's nose wrinkle. The Vortons exchanged glances, their purple eyes gleaming with what looked like amusement. "We have much to offer," Ji-hai continued, ignoring the reactions. "Our artists have created works that span centuries. Our scientists have unlocked the secrets of genetics and quantum mechanics. Our explorers have mapped every corner of our solar system." "How charming," Chancellor Mordok interrupted, his voice dripping with condescension. "A species that has barely left its own star system thinks it has something to teach the galaxy." The chamber erupted in what passed for alien laughter. The Nexari made deep rumbling sounds, while the Cathal's chemical signals turned sharp and acidic. Only a few species remained silent. Watching the proceedings with more serious expressions, Ji-hai waited for the noise to die down before continuing. "We understand our place as newcomers. We seek only friendship and peaceful trade. But there is something about humans that you must understand." She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the assembled representatives. Captain Bei noticed how some of the aliens leaned forward, their attention suddenly focused. There was something in Ji-hai's tone that cut through the mockery. "Throughout our history, humans have shown remarkable adaptability. We have survived ice ages, plagues, and wars that should have destroyed us. We have thrived in every environment our planet could offer, from frozen tundras to burning deserts. But perhaps most importantly, we have learned to control our greatest strength." High Commander Veltar's expression shifted slightly, his predatory instincts picking up on something in the human's words. "We are peaceful by choice," Ji-hai said, her voice carrying a weight that seemed to press against the chamber walls. "We have seen what happens when violence becomes the answer to every problem. Our history is written in the ashes of civilizations that forgot how to stop fighting, so we chose a different path." She stepped closer to the edge of the platform, her eyes meeting those of every major representative. "But please," she said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the chamber, "don't make us angry." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the Kethel's chemical signals stopped, leaving the air strangely neutral. For a moment, something primal flickered in the eyes of the assembled aliens, an instinctive recognition of a predator's warning. Then, Veltar's booming laughter shattered the tension. "Your warning is noted, little human," he said, his voice filled with mockery. "Perhaps you should worry more about making us angry. The Nexari have conquered 12 star systems in the past century. We have turned entire planets into glass. What could a species with fusion rockets and kinetic slugs possibly do to threaten us?" The chamber erupted in renewed laughter, but Jihai noticed that some of the older representatives remained silent. They had seen species rise and fall, had witnessed the galaxy's long history of conflict. Perhaps they recognized something in her words that the younger, more aggressive species missed. "I hope that day never comes, Commander," Jihai replied calmly. "For all our sakes." As the session ended and the representatives began to disperse, Captain Bay moved closer to his ambassador. "Ma'am, do you think they understood?" Jihai watched. As Veltar strode from the chamber, his massive form radiating confidence and contempt. "No, Captain. But they will." The red warning lights bathed the mining station's control room in an eerie glow as Captain Lee Dong-wook stared at the sensor display. 6 months had passed since Ambassador Park Ji-hai's speech to the Galactic Council, and humanity had tried to keep the peace. They had established small mining operations on distant worlds, always choosing uninhabited planets, always following galactic law to the letter. "Sir, those aren't merchant vessels," reported Sergeant Kimbora from the communications station. Her voice was steady, but Dongwook could hear the fear underneath. The massive shapes on their screens were unlike anything in the civilian databases. Kepler-44b was supposed to be safe. The planet was rich in rare minerals that Earth needed for their growing space program, but it was far from any major shipping lanes. The 300 humans living on the station were miners, engineers, and their families. They had laser cutters for mining and a handful of security personnel, but nothing that could be called military. "How many ships?" Dongwook asked, though he could see the answer himself. 7 massive dreadnoughts hung in space above their small station, each one easily 10 times the size of their entire facility. The alien vessels were sleek and predatory, their blue metal hulls gleaming with energy fields that bent light around them. 7 confirmed, Biora replied. "They're not responding to standard hailing frequencies." Dongwook's wife, Dr. Lee Soo-jin, entered the control room carrying their 6-year-old daughter Minji. The little girl clutched a stuffed animal and looked up at the flashing lights with wide, frightened eyes. Around them, other families were gathering, drawn by the emergency alarms that had been wailing for the past 10 minutes. "Daddy, what's happening?" Minji asked, tugging at his uniform sleeve. Before he could answer, the communication system crackled to life. The voice that emerged was deep and harsh, speaking in accented human standard. "This is Commander Veltar of the Nexori Expeditionary Fleet, human mining installation. You will power down all defensive systems and prepare for immediate boarding. Any resistance will result in the termination of all personnel." The control room fell silent except for the hum of life support systems. Dongwook looked around at his people. Chief Engineer Park Hyunwoo, who had spent 3 years building this place from nothing. Security Chief Nam Ji-ho, whose 20 Marines were brave but completely outgunned. Dr. Choi Yansu, who ran the medical bay and had delivered 5 babies on this distant world. "Sir," whispered Nam Ji-ho, "we've got pulse rifles and some mining. Charge as we could make them pay for it." Dongwook shook his head. "With what? Our mining lasers against quantum shields?" He looked down at his daughter, then at the other children scattered throughout the room. "No, but we're not going quietly either." He activated the long-range emergency beacon, the one connected directly to Earth's deep space monitoring network. The message would take weeks to reach home, but it would get there. "This is Captain Lee Dong-wook, commanding officer of Kepler Mining Station," he said into the transmitter. "We are under attack by Nexar warships. They're demanding our surrender. To anyone receiving this message, tell Earth. Tell them we kept the peace as long as we could. Tell them they kept their word too long." The boarding pods hit the station's docking bays with bone-jarring impacts. Through the security cameras, Dongwook watched as armored Nexari soldiers poured through. The airlocks. Warriors stood 8 feet tall, their blue scales gleaming under the station's lights. They moved with terrifying efficiency, their plasma weapons cutting through security doors like paper. The first scream came from Sector 7, where the Nexari had cornered a group of miners' families. Dongwook watched helplessly as parents were torn away from their children, the aliens showing no mercy for age or innocence. The children's cries echoed through the station's corridors, mixing with the harsh barking orders of their captors. "Please," Dr. Lee Soo-jin pleaded as Nexari soldiers entered the control room. "The children haven't done anything wrong." The lead warrior, his armor marked with combat honors, barely glanced at her. "All humans are property of the Nexari Empire now. You will comply or be eliminated." Within 2 hours, every human on Kepler Station was in chains. The mining equipment that had taken years to install was being loaded onto Nexari transports. Families who had built new lives among the stars found themselves crammed into cargo holds designed for equipment, not people. As their transport lifted off, Dongwoo caught one last glimpse of their home through a small porthole. The station that had been humanity's foothold in this sector was already being dismantled by Nexari engineering teams. Back on Earth, Ambassador Park Ji-hai received word of the attack 3 weeks later. She immediately called for an emergency session of the Galactic Council, her diplomatic immunity allowing her to demand an audience within 24 hours. The same crystalline chamber that had witnessed her peaceful introduction now hosted a very different kind of speech. Ji-hai stood at the central platform, her face pale but determined, as she detailed the unprovoked attack on Kepler Station. 300 civilians, she said, her voice carrying across the chamber. Engineers, doctors, teachers, children, taken from their homes and enslaved by the Nexari Empire. Chancellor Mordok of the Vortons waved a dismissive hand. Internal conflicts between species are not the concern of this council. If humans cannot defend their territory, perhaps they should not have ventured so far from home. This was not a conflict, Ji-hai replied, her calm voice cutting through the murmurs of agreement from other representatives. This was piracy, slavery, murder. High Commander Veltar's image appeared on the main display, transmitted from his flagship. The humans established mining operations in territory that the Nexari Empire has claimed for expansion. They were warned to leave. They refused. The consequences are their own responsibility. Ji-hai looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of representatives from dozens of species. So this is galactic justice? It's a strong take what they want, and the rest of you look the other way? The Kethel ambassador's compound eyes glittered. Welcome to reality, little human. The galaxy belongs to those powerful enough to hold it. For a moment, Ji-hai said nothing. Then she stepped forward, her hands gripping the platform's edge. Please, she said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. Don't make us angry. The chamber erupted in the now familiar alien laughter. They had heard this warning before, and nothing had happened. What could these primitive humans possibly do? 3 more human colonies fell in the following weeks. Each attack followed the same pattern: overwhelming force, complete surrender, families separated and enslaved. Each time, Ji-hai appeared before the Galactic Council with the same plea for intervention, and each time, her warning was ignored. Dr. Kim Min-ho was analyzing quantum crystalline structures in his Seoul laboratory when every screen in the building suddenly switched to the same broadcast. The emergency override signal cut through all regular programming across Earth, forcing billions of people to witness what was about to unfold. The image showed the interior of a Nexar warship, its dark, metal walls gleaming under harsh artificial lights. Commander Veltar stood at the center of the frame, his massive blue-scaled form radiating authority and cruelty. Behind him, 23 human prisoners knelt on the cold deck plating, their hands bound with energy restraints that glowed an ominous red dot. Min-ho recognized some of the faces immediately. There was Captain Lee Dong-wook from Kepler Station, his mining uniform torn and stained with dried blood. Beside him knelt Dr. Choi Yan-soo, the station's medical officer, her face bruised, but her eyes still defiant. A young woman held a small child close to her chest, both of them trembling with fear. "Citizens of the galaxy," Veltar began, his voice carrying the casual arrogance of absolute power. "Today you witness the price of defiance," these humans thought. Their species was protected by galactic law. They believed their pathetic warnings carried weight. The camera panned across the prisoners, showing their faces in cruel detail. These weren't soldiers or criminals. They were miners, engineers, doctors, parents, people who had signed up to explore the stars and build a better future for humanity. In laboratories, offices, homes, and schools across Earth, 4 billion humans stopped what they were doing and watched. Minho's research assistant, Lee Haijin, gasped and covered her mouth. Down the hall. Professor Park Sang-woo was teaching a quantum physics class when his students' tablets all switched to the broadcast. On the streets of Seoul, massive public displays showed the same horrific scene. "Let this serve as a message to all humans," Veltar continued, gesturing toward the prisoners with one clawed hand. "Your species exists only at our sufferance. You are nothing more than convenient labor, useful until we decide otherwise." Captain Dong-wook raised his head, looking directly into the camera. His voice was hoarse but clear. "Tell my family. Tell Earth... We never broke our promise. We stayed peaceful to the end." Veltar raised his plasma rifle, its charging coils beginning to glow with deadly energy. "Your peace means nothing. Your warnings were the bleatings of prey animals." The discharge was quick and merciless. 23 humans died in an instant, their bodies collapsing to the metallic deck. The camera lingered on their still forms for several long seconds before the transmission ended. The silence that followed was deafening. Minho stood frozen in his laboratory, his hands gripping the edge of his workbench so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Something fundamental had shattered inside him, not just in his own mind, but in something deeper, something that connected him. To every other human being on the planet, it was as if a switch had been thrown in the collective human consciousness. For decades, Earth's leaders had preached patience and diplomacy. They had built their space program on principles of peaceful exploration and scientific advancement. They had warned the galaxy to leave them alone, but they had never explained. What would happen if that warning was ignored? Now they knew. Minho's hands were shaking as he reached for his personal communicator. Before he could activate it, the device buzzed with an incoming priority message. The sender was listed as Office of Diplomatic Relations Ambassador Park Ji-hai. "To all human citizens currently serving in civilian capacities throughout the galaxy," came Ji-hai's familiar voice, though it carried a weight that Minho had never heard before. "Effective immediately, you are ordered to return to Earth. All diplomatic missions are hereby terminated. All trade agreements are suspended. All scientific collaborations are ended." There was a pause, and when she continued, her voice was deadly calm. "What comes next is not our choice. It's yours, Galaxy. You were warned." The message ended, but its impact was just beginning. Within minutes, emergency broadcasts were going out on every human communication network. Ships docked at alien ports received immediate recall orders. Scientists working on joint research projects with alien colleagues began packing their equipment. Traders closed their deals and prepared for departure. On the Vorton homeworld, Merchant Captain Oh-soon-kwon was negotiating a contract for rare earth minerals when his ship's computer announced the recall order. The purple-skinned Vorton trader. Mortek watched in confusion as the human gathered his samples and headed for the door. "But we haven't finished our negotiations," Mortek protested. "The profit margins are excellent." Sung-hwan paused at the doorway. "The negotiations are over all of them." Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. On the Kethel Research Station in the Andromeda Relay, human xenobiologist Dr. Yoon Soo-min was in the middle of cataloging alien microorganisms when the message arrived. Her Kethel colleagues watched in bewilderment as she methodically destroyed her research notes and wiped her computer systems. "Aye! Why are you destroying years of work?" clicked Ambassador Zicht H in confusion. "Because some knowledge shouldn't exist," Soo-min replied, crushing the data crystals under her boot. The exodus began within hours. Human civilian vessels throughout the galaxy changed course for Earth, abandoning contracts, research projects, and friendships that had taken years to build. The galaxy's intelligence services noted the sudden withdrawal with mild curiosity but no real concern. On Earth, different preparations were beginning. Minho found himself called to an emergency meeting at the Korean Advanced Defense Institute, a facility he'd never heard of despite working in the same field for 20 years. The building was hidden beneath Seoul's subway system, accessible only through security checkpoints that scanned DNA and brainwave patterns. Inside, he met scientists, engineers, and military officials he'd never seen before. People who had been working in parallel to the civilian space program, developing technologies that the galaxy had never witnessed. Dr. Kim, said Director Bang Mung-soo, a woman whose name appeared on no public records, your work on quantum crystalline structures is exactly what we need for the new targeting systems. Targeting systems? Minho asked. Bang's expression was grim. The galaxy chose to make us angry, Doctor. Now they get to see what angry humans are capable of. Across Earth, similar facilities were activating. Projects that had been theoretical for decades suddenly received unlimited funding and priority status. The peaceful space program that the galaxy knew about was just the public face of humanity's expansion into space. The real human space program had been preparing for this day, since first contact and now. As the last civilian ships made their way home, carrying the survivors of humanity's attempt at peaceful coexistence, the galaxy was about to discover what they had awakened. Admiral Song Hyran stood on the command bridge of the UES Incheon, her fingers tracing the worn metal railing as she watched death approach her home system. The bridge around her hummed with quiet efficiency, dozens of officers working at stations that most of the galaxy had never seen before. Unlike the civilian ships that aliens were familiar with, this vessel bore no external markings, no diplomatic identifiers, nothing to suggest it was anything more than a patrol craft. Distance to Nexari Fleet? She asked, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had spent 30 years preparing for this exact moment. 18 million kilometers. And closing, Admiral, reported Commander Yoon Tae-yoon from the sensor station. His fingers danced across holographic displays that showed tactical information in 3 dimensions. 67 dreadnoughts confirmed, each one massing approximately 2 million tons. Intelligence estimates put their total force at over 2 million warriors. Kieran nodded, studying the enemy formation. The Nexari were approaching in their standard battle wedge, massive ships designed to crack planetary defenses with overwhelming firepower. Their quantum shields flickered with energy patterns that could deflect most known weapons, or plasma. Cannons could melt through a kilometer of solid steel in seconds. They had used these same ships to conquer 12 star systems. Entire civilizations had surrendered, rather than face the terrible power of an Nexari war fleet. Mom called Lieutenant Park Jinwoo from communications. We're receiving a transmission from the flagship. It's Commander Veltar. Put him through. Hayrin replied, straightening her uniform. Round the bridge, her officers continued their work, but she could sense their attention focusing on the main display. Veltar's scaled face appeared on the screen, his expression radiating the smug confidence of a predator cornering wounded prey. Behind him, the bridge of his flagship bustled with activity as Nexari warriors prepared for what they assumed would be a quick victory. Human Admiral Veltar began, his voice carrying the casual arrogance that had terrorized dozens of species. I offer you one chance to avoid the complete destruction of your pathetic homeworld. You will surrender your primitive vessels and submit to Nexari authority. Your species' rebellion ends now. Heron smiled, but it wasn't the diplomatic expression that Ambassador Park Jae-hai had worn during those futile peace negotiations. This was something far more dangerous, the smile of a hunter who had been waiting patiently for her prey to walk into the trap. Commander Veltar, she said, her voice carrying across the bridge with deadly calm. You were warned. Multiple times. My people tried diplomacy. They tried peaceful coexistence. They begged your government and the Galactic Council to leave us alone. But you chose to make us angry. Veltar's expression shifted slightly, some primitive instinct recognizing the change in the human's tone. Your pathetic threats mean nothing to The transmission cut off as Heron made a sharp gesture to her communications officer. She turned to Commander Yoon at the weapons station. A man who had spent 15 years working on systems that existed in no public database signaled the fleet. She ordered, "Execute Protocol 7." The space around the Sol system suddenly rippled like water, reality itself seeming to bend and twist. What had appeared to be empty space moments before suddenly filled with ships, hundreds of them materializing from what the galaxy would later learn was humanity's first practical application of dimensional folding technology. The vessels that appeared were unlike anything in the known galaxy. Their hulls were composed of materials that seemed to absorb light, making them appear as dark silhouettes against the starfield. Energy patterns flowed across their surfaces like living neural networks, indicating power systems that operated on principles the galaxy's scientists had only theorized about. "Fleet status report," Heron commanded. 437 vessels now active, Admiral," reported Commander Yoon. "All gravitational manipulation drives online." Fighter squadrons launching from concealed carriers through the bridge's viewing ports. Aren watched as sleek fighter craft poured from ships that had appeared to be nothing more than asteroids. The fighters moved with impossible grace, her enhanced pilots pushing their craft through maneuvers that would have pulped ordinary humans with gravitational forces. Pilot Choi Soo-jin was one of those enhanced humans, her body modified with genetic improvements that had been developed in secret laboratories for decades. As her fighter dove between two massive Nexari dreadnoughts, her enhanced nervous system processed combat data at speeds that made her seem like a living computer. Her reflexes operated faster than thought, her modified eyes tracking dozens of targets simultaneously. The Nexari weapons officers tried to target her craft, but their conventional tracking systems couldn't follow her impossible movements. Sujin's fighter seemed to dance through space, avoiding plasma bursts that should have been impossible to dodge. Her quantum torpedoes struck with pinpoint accuracy, each impact tearing through shields that had never been breached before. "Nexari. Flagship is attempting to retreat," reported the tactical officer. "Negative," Heron replied. "No survivors. No witnesses. They wanted to see what happens when humans get angry. Show them." The battle that followed defied everything the galaxy thought it knew about warfare. Human vessels moved through space like living things, their gravity manipulation drives, allowing them to change direction instantly, accelerate to impossible speeds, and even phase through solid matter for brief moments. The Nexari plasma cannons, feared throughout the galaxy, proved useless against human shielding technology that operated by bending space-time itself. Human quantum torpedoes didn't just destroy enemy ships, they erased them from existence, leaving not even debris behind. Commander Veltar's final transmission was cut short as his flagship simply ceased to exist, consumed by weapons that turned matter into pure energy. The other Nexari vessels lasted only minutes longer, their crews experiencing a terror that their conquering ancestors had never imagined. Across the galaxy, intelligence services that had been monitoring the expected human defeat fell silent as their sensors registered impossible readings. The Vorten High Command watched their displays in stunned disbelief. As energy signatures that shouldn't exist tore through the most powerful fleet in known space. The Kethel Collective's monitoring stations detected gravitational waves that indicated technology centuries beyond their understanding. Their compound eyes processed data that their minds struggled to accept. Humans had just demonstrated capabilities that suggested they had been concealing their true technological advancement for decades. On the Nexari homeworld, military commanders, who had been celebrating an easy victory, suddenly found themselves staring at empty communication channels. 67 dreadnoughts, the pride of their empire, had simply vanished from their sensors. The battle lasted exactly 47 minutes. When it ended, the Nexari fleet existed only as expanding clouds of superheated particles, their atoms. Scattered across millions of kilometers of space, Admiral Song Heron stood on her bridge, watching the last traces of enemy fire fade from her displays. Around her, officers began powering down weapon systems that had performed flawlessly after decades of secret development. "Ma'am," Commander Yoon reported, "all enemy vessels destroyed." Human casualties reported. Heron nodded, then activated the fleet communication system. Her words would be transmitted not just to her own forces, but to every intelligence-gathering station within 100 light-years. "This is Admiral Song Heron of the Human Defense Fleet. Let it be known throughout the galaxy that humanity tried peace. We offered friendship. We gave warnings that were ignored. Today, the Nexari Empire learned the price of making humans angry. Let this serve as a lesson to any other species considering similar actions." The transmission ended, leaving the galaxy to contemplate a terrifying new reality. Humanity had not been the primitive species they appeared to be. It had been preparing, waiting, building weapons and capabilities in secret, while publicly pursuing peace, and now, for the first time in galactic history, an entire empire had been erased in less than an hour. Ambassador Park Ji-hai walked through the corridors of Harmony Station, her footsteps echoing off the polished metal walls. 6 months had passed since the Battle of Seoul, and everything had changed. The station itself was a marvel of human engineering, constructed in Earth's orbit using technologies that had remained hidden for decades. Its massive rotating sections generated artificial gravity, while its outer hull gleamed with defensive systems that could repel any known weapon. The galactic mental chamber looked very different now. Gone were the towering crystalline structures that had housed the original council on Nexus Prime. Instead, the representatives sat in simple chairs arranged in a perfect circle, with no elevated platforms or positions of dominance. The message was clear: no species was above any other, and all would be equal under human oversight. Ji-hai entered the chamber and took her place at the center of the circle. Around her, the assembled alien representatives watched with expressions that ranged from barely concealed fear to grudging respect. The purple-skinned Vorton sat stiffly in their chairs, their usual merchant confidence replaced by nervous tension. The insectoid Kethel's compound eyes darted constantly toward the massive viewport that dominated one wall of the chamber. Through that viewport, the human fleet was visible in all its terrifying glory. Thousands of vessels hung in formation around Earth, their dark hulls absorbing starlight like hungry shadows. These weren't the small civilian craft that the galaxy had grown accustomed to seeing. These were warships, each one capable of obliterating entire planets, their weapon systems operating on principles that the galaxy's scientists still couldn't fully understand. "The Nexari Empire has been dismantled," Ji-hai announced, a voice carrying the same calm authority that had once pleaded for peace. Their military assets have been destroyed or confiscated. Their former territories are now under human protection, and their populations are being relocated to worlds where they can live peacefully under our supervision. Chancellor Mordok of the Vortons shifted nervously in his seat, his purple skin taking on a paler hue. "Ambassador Ji-hai, surely we can reach some accommodation. The Vortons have always been a peaceful trading species. We had no part in the Nexari attacks." Ji-hai turned to face him directly, her expression unchanged. "The time for accommodation was 6 months ago, Chancellor, and we begged this council to intervene. We warned you repeatedly what would happen if you made us angry. You chose to stand by and watch while our people were enslaved and murdered." The Kethel representative Zikth clicked his mandibles nervously. "We believed the Nexari claims that humans had violated territorial boundaries. We did not know you didn't want to know," Ji-hai interrupted. "It was easier to believe that humans were weak, that our warnings were empty posturing. You laughed at us. You mocked our attempts at diplomacy." Through the viewport, a new group of ships was approaching. These weren't warships, but transport vessels, carrying the survivors of the Nexari attacks back to human space. Among them was a small frigate, commanded by Lieutenant Lee So-young, the daughter of Captain Lee Dong-wook, who had died in the execution broadcast that changed everything. "My father believed in peace," So-young had told Ji-hai during their last meeting. He followed orders to remain peaceful even when it cost him his life. But his sacrifice wasn't meaningless. It showed the galaxy who we really were and who they chose to be. Now So-young commanded one of the patrol vessels that enforced humanity's new galactic order. Her ship, the UES Kepler's Memory, carried weapons that could crack moons in half. But she used it primarily to escort refugee ships and protect vulnerable colonies from the chaos that had followed the Nexari collapse. The Galactic Council chamber fell silent as Ji-hai walked to the viewport. Behind her, Fleet Admiral Kang Seung-ho's flagship, the UES Retribution, hung in space like a steel mountain. The vessel was 5 kilometers long, its hull bristling with quantum torpedo launchers and gravity manipulation arrays. It had been built in the hidden shipyards of Titan, constructed using technologies that had been developed in secret for over 30 years. "Defense Minister Im Jun sends her regards," Ji-hai said, not turning from the viewport. She wanted to be here personally, but she's busy coordinating the integration of former Nexari territories into the new galactic security framework. The Kethel representative clicked anxiously. "What? What are your terms, Ambassador?" Ji-hai finally turned back to face the assembled aliens. "Simple. Complete military disarmament of all species that failed to condemn the Nexari attacks. Immediate submission to human oversight of all interstellar conflicts. And most importantly," her expression hardened, taking on the same dangerous quality that Admiral Song Hairin had shown during the battle, "never again will any species be allowed to harm humans without facing immediate and overwhelming consequences." The silence that followed was broken only by the nervous shifting of alien representatives. The Vorten Chancellor attempted one more diplomatic approach. "Ambassador, surely there must be some way too." "There is," Ji-hai said simply. "Accept our terms. Disarm your military fleets. Submit to human peacekeeping oversight. Flow. And never again mistake human mercy for human weakness." On the main display, images began cycling through scenes from across the galaxy. Former Nexari slave. Worlds where human forces had liberated millions of prisoners. Refugee camps where human medical teams treated the wounded from dozens of species. Construction sites where human engineers were building new infrastructure on worlds devastated by Nexari conquest. But the images also showed the darker side of humanity's new role. Orbital bombardment platforms hanging over worlds whose governments had initially refused to comply with human demands. The remains of pirate fleets that had thought they could prey on shipping lanes now under human protection. The empty space, where entire military installations had once existed before they were judged to be threats to galactic peace. "We are still peaceful by choice," Ji-hai continued, gesturing toward the viewport where rescue ships were arriving with the latest group of liberated prisoners. "We would rather build hospitals than weapons platforms. We would rather explore new worlds than conquer them. But you made us angry and now you live with the consequences." The Kethel representative managed to find his voice. How long have you been preparing for this?" Ji-hai smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. "Did you really think a species that survived ice ages, plagues, and world wars would venture into space without contingency plans? We hoped we would never need them. We prayed that the galaxy would accept us as peaceful neighbors. But we prepared for the alternative." She activated a holographic display that showed the true scope of humanity's hidden preparations. Shipyards. Hidden in asteroid belts throughout human space. Research facilities on dead worlds where scientists had worked in secret for decades. Military training centers where volunteers had undergone genetic modifications to become enhanced soldiers and pilots. Every human diplomat who spoke of peace, Ji-hai explained, was backed by human engineers building weapons that sought friendship, was protected by human intelligence agents gathering information about potential enemies. "We gave you every chance to prove that coexistence was possible." The alien representatives stared at the display in stunned silence. The Vortens, who had prided themselves on their commercial intelligence networks, realized they had completely failed to detect the largest military buildup in galactic history. The Kethals, whose hive minds could process vast amounts of information, understood that they had been systematically deceived for decades. The new galactic order is not negotiable, Jihai concluded. It is the direct result of choices made by this council 6 months ago. You chose to ignore our warnings. You chose to stand by while humans were murdered. You chose to believe that might makes right. She gestured once more to the viewport, where Lieutenant Soyoung's ship was leading a convoy of refugee vessels toward safety. Now you live in a galaxy where humanity ensures that such choices have consequences. We'll keep the peace, protect the innocent, and ensure that no species ever again suffers what the Nexari victims endured. The Galactic Council had no choice but to accept. The alternative was joining the Nexari Empire in the history books. Cautionary tale about the price of making humans angry. The galaxy had peace now, enforced by beings who had tried every other option first. It was humanity's version of peace, and it would endure as long as the memory of ignored warnings and the price of awakening sleeping giants. The N